Hello and welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One, and this is Speed News. Let's begin. A day after Ukrainian negotiators sat down with U.S. officials, American and Russian officials met in Riyadh with a Black Sea ceasefire at the top of the agenda. The talks ended after 12 hours of negotiations. The Russian delegation was seen leaving Riyadh after talks with U.S. negotiators. According to Russian state media, a joint statement is expected soon. The Department of State has said that fabulous changes have occurred towards a ceasefire in Ukraine after the talks. While the talks took place, nearly 90 people, including 17 children, were wounded in a missile attack on Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. Russian military also claimed that Ukraine destroyed 4 Russian helicopters in Russia's Belgorod. In a major security blunder by the Trump administration, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, was inadvertently added to a group chat where senior members of the cabinet discussed military strikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels. The White House has confirmed Goldberg was accidentally texted classified military information after he published a first-hand account in The Atlantic. And as per The Atlantic editor, the chat had top senior U.S. officials including Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. However, Hegseth denied the claim, saying no one had texted war plans. He went on to criticize the journalist as deceitful and accused him of repeatedly spreading hoaxes. Palestinian militant group Hamas has published a video of 2 Israeli hostages. The video shows Israeli hostages Elkanah Bobot and Yosef Haim Ohana sitting in an unidentified location and pleading for their return home. 35-year-old Bobot and 24-year-old Ohana were kidnapped by Hamas on October 7, 2023 from the Nova Music Festival. His family reacted to the video with a statement appealing to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump to secure the hostages' release. Meanwhile, the Israeli military issued fresh calls to evacuate parts of Gaza's north as Israel pressed its renewed bombardment and ground operations in the Palestinian territory. Egypt has floated a new proposal aimed at restoring the Gaza ceasefire deal. The Egyptian proposal, made last week, calls for Hamas to release 5 Israeli hostages each week, with Israel implementing the second phase of the ceasefire after the first week. The proposal follows an escalation in violence after Israel resumed air and ground operations against Hamas on March 18th. Ending a 2-month period of relative calm after 15 months of war. According to Gaza Health Ministry, the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 50,000 since the start of the war. U.S. President Donald Trump has defended Vice President J.D. Vance's wife, Second Lady Usha Vance's Greenland visit, saying it was about friendliness during a cabinet meeting. Trump said that it is Greenland which is calling the U.S. there. Trump reiterated his previous statements that Greenland might be in the U.S. in future. Now, this after Greenland's outgoing Prime Minister, Mudegde, termed the private visit of the U.S. Second Lady along with National Security Advisor Mike Waltz politically motivated and stated his caretaker government would not meet the delegation. Usha Vance is scheduled to visit the territory on March 27th. According to her itinerary, she will visit historical sites, learn about Greenlandic heritage, and attend Greenland's national dog sled race. Istanbul's jailed mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu has been officially nominated as the presidential candidate for the 2028 elections. The announcement was made by Republican People's Party, or the CHP. İmamoğlu's nomination names him as a primary opposition to President Erdogan. This comes even as protests continue in Istanbul for the sixth straight day. According to the Interior Minister of Turkey, 1,100 people have been detained since protests began on March 19th. 10 journalists also have been arrested for covering the imprisonment and protests that followed. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has labeled the protests over jailing of the Istanbul mayor as a movement of violence. Amid protests and warnings issued by China, the U.S. Army has said it will not conduct live fire tests of its strategic missile system deployed in the Philippines during their annual joint military drills. The Deputy Chief of U.S. Army Pacific cleared the air in a media briefing last week, saying that the U.S. Army is not planning to carry out live fire in the Philippines. In December last year, the Philippines reportedly considered buying the Typhoon system, but the Typhoon system has not been fired since its deployment in Luzon amid China's repeated warning of strong countermeasures. The statement by the U.S. Army comes ahead of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's visit to Manila this week. This will be Hegseth's first trip to Asia after taking office. Violent clashes broke out between police and student protesters in Indonesia's Surabaya against the newly passed military law. Around 1,000 students and activists dressed in black protested in front of an East Java government building. The protesters held posters that said, "Reject the military law," and the military should return to the barracks. Protesters were seen hurling rocks, sticks, and Molotov cocktails towards the police. Indonesian police resorted to water cannons to disperse the protesters. The protesters have been sparked by an amendment of the military law passed by the Indonesian parliament last week. The amendment expands the role of armed forces in civilian affairs. Under the new law, active military officers can hold positions in 14 government institutions, up from 10 in the previous law. Trouble mounts for former Bangladesh cricket captain Shakib Al Hasan. The Bangladeshi court has ordered the seizure of Hassan's assets. This comes after a warrant for Shakib's arrest was issued by the court in January. Shakib's links to former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has made him a target of public anger. He is among the dozens facing murder investigations for a deadly police crackdown on protesters during the uprising against Hasina. He has not been charged over those allegations, but is currently being prosecuted on fraud charges for allegedly bouncing checks totaling more than $300,000. Shakib was playing in domestic T20 cricket competition in Canada when Hasina's government collapsed and has not returned to Bangladesh since. The United States is keeping a close eye on human rights situation in Bangladesh and the terror threats emanating from the country. In a press briefing, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce called on Bangladesh to follow the rules of human rights like other countries. This comes after Bangladesh Army Chief called for vigilance against potential terror attacks within the next month in the country, as well as rise in extremism. The warning by the Bangladesh Army Chief General Wakar-uz-Zaman came days after Meeting with U.S. Senator Gary Peters, they had discussed Bangladesh's security challenges and how the U.S. can support reform efforts. A day after Kunal Kamra's controversial remarks led to a political war of words and vandalism in India's Maharashtra, the Mumbai police has summoned the comedian and asked him to cooperate in the investigation. Earlier, in a post on social media, Kamra refused to apologize for his comments on the state's Deputy Chief Minister Eknath Shinde. Kamra argued that it was not against the law to poke fun at political leaders. He also criticized the vandalism of the venue where the show was recorded. The controversy broke out when a joke from Kamra's recent stand-up went viral on social media. Kamra had taken a jibe at Shinde for switching sides and mocked the Deputy Chief Minister with a traitor remark using a Bollywood song. For the first time in history, bird flu has been detected in a sheep in northern England. The case has been confirmed during routine surveillance on a farm in Yorkshire, where the infected sheep was discovered among a flock previously affected by the virus in captive birds. In an immediate response to contain the spread of virus, the UK government ordered the culling of the infected along with all affected birds. Avian influenza has been known to infect a range of mammals, including cats, bears, tigers, and even dolphins. This is the first documented case in sheep, a development that significantly heightens concerns over how far the virus may spread. Experts warn that the virus's ability to jump between species is becoming more pronounced, raising fears that it could mutate in ways that increase the risk to human health. Tens of thousands of Argentines marched in Buenos Aires to mark 49 years since the coup d'etat that gave rise to brutal military dictatorship blamed for the disappearance of some 30,000 people. Holding aloft torches and photos of their missing loved ones, the demonstrators gathered under the banner of Memory, Truth and Justice on Argentina's National Day of Remembrance. As participants clamored for truth, the government announced it would declassify intelligence files on the actions of the armed forces during the dictatorship's 1976 to 83 reign. South Korea is struggling to control raging wildfires. Thousands of soldiers and firefighters on ground trying to put out the deadly blazes that have been burning for four days now, killing 4 people and displacing nearly 2,700. These are the aerial visuals of the wildfire in southeastern regions of South Korea that have killed at least 3 firefighters and a public servant. The wildfires have prompted the government to declare a state of emergency in southeastern regions. Officials have warned that high winds and rising temperatures are hindering efforts to control the fires. Oil prices were little changed as markets weighed the impact of newly announced U.S. tariffs on countries that buy Venezuelan oil and the uncertain outlook for global demand. Brent crude futures were up 1% at $73 a barrel by 0424 GMT. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude dipped 1% to $69. Both benchmarks gained more than 1% in the previous session after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on countries importing oil and gas from Venezuela. Oil is Venezuela's main export, and China, which is already the subject of U.S. tariffs, is its largest buyer. The dollar hit a 3-week high against the yen and was firm across the board after some strong U.S. services data and cautious optimism on the tariff front. President Donald Trump said not all of his threatened levies would be imposed on April 2nd, and some countries may get breaks, which help the dollar and the mood on Wall Street overnight by soothing some fears about a possible slowdown in U.S. growth. The lack of momentum in trading, however, showed market uncertainty about tariffs and pushing the dollar any higher. South Korea's Hyundai Motor Group announced a $21 billion investment in the United States with President Donald Trump at the White House on Monday. The investment includes a new $5.8 billion Hyundai steel plant in Louisiana that will produce over 2.7 million metric tons of steel annually, creating more than 1,400 jobs. The steel plant is expected to supply steel to auto plants in Alabama and Georgia. Of the total, Hyundai also plans to invest $9 billion by 2028 to boost U.S. production capacity to 1.2 million vehicles in the United States and $6 billion to expand strategic partnerships with U.S. companies in autonomous driving, robotics, artificial intelligence, and advanced air mobility.